So, how fast is the Lexus LS400? Let's take it to the drag strip and find out.
It is absolutely packed. There's so many people here. I don't think I've ever seen this many people. Motherfucker. Alright, what'd we say? I raced a stinky BMW. My car is cooler, but there it is, ET18. Low 18 is exactly what we guessed, right? So at sea level, possibly mid-16s. Still, I got a great fucking reaction time too.
Alright, so as you can see, up here at altitude, we are running 18s. That's not really that fast, but it's not horribly slow either. Believe it or not, it wasn't the slowest thing at the drag strip. Bandimere Speedway is about to close. There were a ton of cars that turned up to give racing one last try. A lot of people just wanted to race their car, and I saw a lot of slow reaction times. A lot of my reaction times were pretty damn good, by the way. But the LS400, nicknamed the Land Yacht, is not exactly super fast. In my opinion, it's no slouch either. It does have a V8. Generally, they make about 250 horsepower. UCF 20s with variable valve timing and some other adjustments to the engine actually make 300 horsepower, which really isn't all that bad. So up here, we're running about 18s. However, we are located at 5,800 feet above sea level. Due to the way engines work, basically at higher altitudes, they make less power. At sea level, some people might be running mid-16s and sometimes even slightly faster than that. I did hear of someone who broke into the 15s, although it was a slow 15, like a 15.9. There are people who are running considerably faster. Up here at this altitude, we lose about 1 to 1.5, maybe even up to 2 seconds of speed on the quarter mile. So the times that I'm running up here in Colorado are not necessarily going to be the same as somewhere closer to sea level. So let's briefly talk about why cars make less horsepower at higher altitude. When the piston goes down in an engine, the force that drives the air into the empty cylinder is actually atmospheric pressure. I know we refer to it as vacuum. Technically, a true vacuum can't really exist in this universe. So, atmospheric pressure drives the air into the cylinder. Now, at a higher altitude, we have less atmospheric pressure. So for example, when I had a MAP sensor, which is manifold absolute pressure on my Miata, it would read in kilopascals, which is a metric measurement of pressure in the intake manifold. At sea level, it would be 100 kilopascals, which is pretty much like 100% of atmospheric pressure. But on my Miata up here, it would be at like 82, which is essentially 20% less atmospheric pressure. Pretty significant. Cars definitely make less power at altitude, and that's why. There's less atmospheric pressure driving it into the cylinder. It's as simple as that. Turbochargers and superchargers, being forced induction, operate with a wastegate. So the wastegate needs to see a certain amount of excess pressure before it stops building boost. So you can actually overcome that with turbochargers and superchargers, but there's a lot more to that. But that's kind of the basics of it. So there's kind of like 4 things that determine how fast a car is. Power, weight are the 2 obvious ones. Now, we've already discussed the power a little bit. We have about 250 horsepower measured at the crank, and it's important to keep in mind that there is such thing as drivetrain loss. The amount of horsepower that a car makes at the crank, it's going to lose some of that power throughout getting it to the wheels, which is why there's always a big difference between wheel horsepower and crank horsepower. The engine may make 250 horsepower, but if we put our little LS400 on a dynamometer, we might get a little bit different of a number. So weight is the second factor. Now, these cars are heavy. If you Google it, it says they weigh 3950 or something along those lines. Now, luckily, at Bandimere Speedway, they have a scale, and I put mine on it. All right, there it is. Outside of the car, 3,900. So unfortunately, the Google curb weight of 3,900 is pretty much right on the money. There's a couple things involving weight that are good to know. If you have any junk in the trunk, i.e. any stuff in your car, well, that weighs stuff. And then if you have junk in your trunk, as in your own body, well, guess what? You add to the weight of that car as well. Sometimes, especially in my case, if I lost a little weight, that would actually be the quickest and fastest way to drop like 50 pounds off my car. Now, another factor people don't really consider too often is gasoline has a weight. So gasoline weighs about 6 pounds a gallon. Technically, the fuel system's like 22 gallons, but every time you fill up, it's what? 18, 19 gallons. And when I ran my car, it had a full tank of fuel. So a full tank of gasoline in this car is worth over 100 pounds. And that's not exactly insignificant. So at 3,900 pounds, our little land yacht happens to weigh as much as most light trucks. That would be why it's not super fast. Now, the third factor of what determines how quickly a car goes down the track would be shift times. Now, the LS400 generally gets sold with an automatic transmission. I have not manual swapped mine, and I have not modified it whatsoever, and I'm pretty sure it's the original transmission. It has relatively fresh fluid. I do not have the little switch under the pan turned on. There is a switch that you can turn on, which I believe changes line pressure and makes it shift a little more harsher, faster, and can technically make it a little quicker. But there are two things from the factory that might help us out a little bit. We have an ECT button and then an overdrive off switch. So overdrive in an automatic transmission is essentially designed to give us a nice, comfortable cruising speed on the highway. So by turning it off, we actually prevent the car from shifting into a more pleasing gear. Basically, it lets the car rev higher. Now, the ECT essentially does the same thing. ECT stands for electronically controlled transmission. What this does is it changes the shift points, and I believe it might change it so it shifts a little harsher. So I don't know if it's actually able to electronically change the line pressure in the transmission. Essentially, the ECT button allows it to be faster by changing the responsiveness of the transmission. It's also more aggressive with downshifting. However, when you're drag racing, you pretty much just go wide open throttle and never let off. All I really did here was I kept traction control on, I turned overdrive off, and I turned ECT to sport fast mode, whatever it's called, hit the gas, and never let off wide open throttle. And that's it. So one of the final things that kind of determines how quickly a car goes down the track would be the actual traction. How much of that power are you actually able to put down on the ground? I have just regular, well, not even regular, I have winter tires on my car, and they were filled at probably around 32 psi. Typically, when you drop your tire pressure, that allows the tire to be a little grippier, essentially, and you can feel it when you fill up a tire. When you have higher pressure, it kind of makes the tire harder, and with off-roading, for example, they will drop to very low tire pressures, so that tire actually starts to wrap around the ground and rocks and that kind of thing. If you go to autocross meets, people are dropping their tire pressure as low as like 25, even like 20 psi to get some good grip. Even in some drag slicks, you can see a little bit of a ripple. Generally speaking, the lower tire pressure, you'll get a little better grip because, again, the tire can conform to the road a little better. Obviously, you don't want to go too low, but I didn't touch my tire pressure at all, and I was running on winter tires. I don't really think I had much wheel spin. I launched fairly well, and, you know, all I really did was I took my left foot, held the brake, and just kind of mashed into the gas. I didn't completely floor it immediately, but just essentially went to wide open throttle very quickly. And that's how I launched it. As simple as that. Wheel spin, I'm pretty sure, was not a big problem, although I will say on the track, it's much harder to tell because there's always rubber coating the road, so you don't really get all of the noise and the feedback that you typically do. So it could be that I slipped a little bit and I couldn't hear anything because I didn't get any kind of noise or screeching or that kind of thing. So, is the LS400 fast? I mean, I think it's a pretty unanimous no. For the record, there was a 4Runner at the track that was like maybe half a second or a second slower than me. The LS400, in my opinion, has a decent amount of power. It does have a V8 after all, and the 1UZ is no slouch. It just so happens that it's a giant car. And the transmission, I don't know, there's something very linear about it, so it kind of just goes, and it will keep going, which is very nice. And of course, as I'm sure plenty of you know, there are some absolute elitists about what is considered fast. There's people who wouldn't even consider a 10-second quarter mile fast. In my opinion, anything running 14s and faster is a decently sporty and quick car in my book, especially if we're talking about up here in Colorado. That is not an easy feat, and frankly, most cars are not exactly doing 14 seconds. Now, obviously, there's the meme of Fast and Furious where it's like, oh, you owe me a 10-second car.
I said a 10-second car, not a 10-minute car.
10-second car is a pretty goddamn fast car. In fact, like, some of those little rice burners in Fast and Furious are not running 10s, bro. Like, ironically, the only things that I'm seeing running like 9s and 10s up here are like full-blown race cars, like gutted, big build Hondas, and like full-blown race cars. Essentially, if you're running 10s up here at Bandimere, your car is getting squirrely. Your car is sketchy. That's how fast 10s are here. According to NHRA rules, you have to wear a helmet running 14s or faster, which is kind of where I get that number from. In my opinion, if they require you to have a helmet on the track, you're about there. I think most sports cars are kind of around that area. A lot of turbocharged 4-cylinders like Subarus, Evos, those kinds of things. That's going to be kind of the territory they're in. But the fact is, running a 10-second quarter mile for most car enthusiasts would make them shit themselves. And of course, there's a lot of people who would never even take their car to the track in the first place. So I think just showing up is great. So I also had really nice reaction times. Typically, if you react immediately when you see a green light, you'll never run faster than half a second. Most drag racers are actually launching on the final amber light before they even see the green. This allows you to get a near perfect reaction time. All of my reaction times were very low and very consistent. I'm super happy with my performance as a racer. I was also able to do that in my manual Miata. It also had launch control. The Miata was running 18s as well, for what it's worth. And then again, my friend had his IS, which was running high 17s. So just to reiterate, again, the fastest time I ran was like a 17.9. If you Google it and you look up quarter mile times for an LS400, typically what you'll see is about 16s, kind of right on the money, 16.2, 16.3. They actually got slightly faster every year, apparently. And there's a significant jump when you get to the UCF 20s, because again, you have 50 extra horsepower with the variable valve timing and all that. And of course, my car may not be running as fast as it possibly could. I mean, it literally needs a new air filter. My air filter is pretty clogged. I mean, I think my spark plug, it needs a tune-up, long story short. But I did recently replace my ECU, so I don't really think I'm lacking a whole lot of power as far as like the ECU or transmission goes. And, you know, it does have almost 300,000 miles on it, so it gets a little bit of a pass for being slightly slower than it's supposed to be. Whatever. It was fun, okay? That's a rough idea of how fast the Lexus LS400 is. If you enjoyed this video and found it informational, leave a like, leave a comment if you have any questions, any comments, if you have anything to say, and don't forget to subscribe for more car, DIY, Lexus, all kinds of stuff. But I'll see you later, humans.